Welcome to another episode of the Plutus Awards podcast. I'm your host, Chris Browning. Our community is filled with hundreds of stories from creators and entrepreneurs just like you. And through this podcast, we plan to share these stories from bloggers to podcasters, writers, speakers, and more. Let's meet today's guest.
Hi, my name is Paula Pant. I am the founder of affordanything.com. I've been blogging since 2011 and podcasting since 2016. I started this because I quit my job more than a decade ago and traveled, backpacked around the world for a couple of years. And when I did that, a lot of people said, oh, I would love to travel, but I can't afford it. And so I wanted to spread the message that you can afford anything, but not everything.
Welcome to the show, Paula.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
As entrepreneurs, there are, I think, two issues that come up pretty often. First, how do we answer questions that come up pretty frequently from our audience and, also provide the most value to them? And second, how do we create more diverse streams of income? Because I think it just makes sense to, if something were to happen in one stream, to have other options. And because as an entrepreneur, you're sustaining yourself. Mm-hmm. I think courses have become a great solution to that problem because I think they fulfill both of those needs for our audience and then also for ourselves as entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. And so you've actually launched a course this year. It's called Your First Rental Property. And how's that been so far?
It's great. I'm loving it. I really enjoy working with the students in the course. The thing that I didn't anticipate that has been really tremendously awesome is how much of a relationship I've started developing with many of the students inside of the course. I start getting to know them, their background, the places that they're interested in investing in. Oftentimes, if somebody sends me an email with a question or leaves a comment in which they ask a question, I don't really know who that person is, right? Mm. That's just a random person leaving a blog comment, with some type of an internet handle. I might answer their question, but I'm not actually forming a relationship with them per se. Whereas when you're working with students in a course, and my course, Your First Rental Property, goes on for 10 weeks. So in a 10-week course, there's a lot of time that you have to develop a pretty close relationship with students. And that is, I think, one of the most fulfilling parts and probably one of the most valuable parts of being in this course. So I have office hours in which any student can come and ask me any question. And you see the ones who keep coming back and you hear their stories and you learn about them. And there are these forums in which they can talk to each other and support each other too. So this whole community comes out of it. So all of that's been really great.
No, that's really cool because with the course, like you're explaining, you get more of a connection with your audience and I think you would in a lot of other situations. Mm-hmm. And I know for you, this isn't the first project that you've tackled. This has been like a culmination of years of hard work and other things that you've done over the course, of your career. And so I wanted to get a little bit better understanding of your background and kind of what's led you to this point, because you actually started off writing, correct?
Yeah. So before I was a blogger, my professional background was as a very, very small time newspaper reporter. From 2005 to 2008, I wrote for a small newspaper. In hindsight, it was my one and only W-2 job working for somebody else that I've ever had to this point so far. I quit that job in 2008 with $25,000 in savings, traveled for a couple of years, came back to the US in 2010, and started Afford Anything in 2011. For the first 5 years, Afford Anything was a blog, and I wrote articles. And that's really, what I was trained to do as a newspaper reporter, and it's kind of where my head was at. But what I found was that when you're writing an article, particularly about a particular topic like personal finance or financial independence, a lot of what you're doing is teaching. But there's only so much that you can teach in a given article, right? An article is, by its very nature, limited to one concept or one idea. And you can put that singular idea across in a single article, but you can never really link everything together into a cohesive whole, right? And whole, like WHOLE, holistically. Similarly, when I started the podcast, each episode, you have to assume that any given person may or may not listen to more than one episode, right? So each episode needs to be able to stand on its own. That's kind of the interesting thing about podcast production is you simultaneously have to assume that somebody is binging on all of the episodes. So your episodes can't be too repetitive, while also assuming that any given person might only listen to that one. So each episode needs to be unique. And so again, you can talk about a single concept or a single idea, or you can interview a single guest or answer unique questions on a given episode. But again, you can't put all of the puzzle pieces together. You have all of these individual, if you think of a quilt, right? You have all of these individual squares, but you never get to sew them together and create the whole quilt. Or you think of a mosaic, you never get to like put the pieces together. And that I thought was what a course could really do. It's so much of what I talk about, especially when you talk about a complex topic like investing, a lot of knowledge builds on previous knowledge. And so oftentimes when people on the blog or in a podcast would ask a question, in order to be able to more thoroughly answer that question, I would have to introduce different knowledge or additional knowledge because the answer to their question is built on a foundation of other knowledge that they may or may not have. And so again, it seemed like the framework for a course would be able to address all of that because then you can lay out all of the knowledge that a person needs and you can do so in a way in which subsequent modules build on what people have learned in previous modules.
Would you say that your background in writing was helpful in developing your course?
I don't know. I don't even know if it was helpful in developing a blog, to be honest. I think there are both pros and cons. Newspaper journalism is a very specific animal of its own, one in which you are taught never to put your own personality into your writing. And that was the biggest thing to unlearn when I became a blogger and a podcaster and then subsequently a course creator, because so much of that is personality driven. People choose a given person's course over a different given person's course because they relate to the teacher and they want to learn from that particular teacher. And if you've been classically trained as a journalist, not that I had that much classical training, but with the background, the brief professional background that I have, my training hammered home the ethos of keep your personality out of it. That part was quite difficult to unlearn. On the other hand, basic rules about story structure, grammar, style, you could learn it by, reading The Elements of Style by Strunk and White, or you could learn it by reading the AP Style book. But how many people actually do? You need a certain level of discipline to do that. I give people that advice all the time, and I bet the vast majority who hear it never take me up on it.
That's interesting because you're completely right. There are different styles depending on the environment that you're in. So that's really interesting that you had to kind of break some of the habits that you had from your original days of writing for a newspaper and then, translate that into the more, I guess, informal environment of blogging and podcasting and then essentially the course. And so for people listening who are like, I'm interested in starting a course, but I really have no idea like how to go from I would like to start a course to here's the first thing I should do, or the first few things I should do if I would like to start a course. So for you, what were your first steps once you had the idea for this course that you wanted to build? What were some of the things that you did to get yourself started and start moving in the right direction?
The first thing that I did was I validated the idea. So I introduced it to my audience. I rolled out the idea. I asked them if they'd be interested. I pre-sold the course to a group of beta testers. I actually went through 2 different rounds of beta testing, because the course development ended up taking a total of 3 years. So my initial round of beta testing, we limited it to 50 beta testers, and that was the validation round. Those beta testers have now been with me for over 3 years. About 3 years in, we opened it up to a second round of beta testers. Because the initial group had been with me for 3 years, they saw the whole thing get built piecemeal. And so then I wanted to introduce it to a second round of beta testers who would go through it sequentially from start to finish so that they could have that experience and then they could offer feedback on what could be improved about that experience. That was why we did 2 rounds of beta before rolling it out to the first cohort. So to answer your question, your original question, what was my first step once I decided that I had this idea? My first step was to validate it by rolling it out to a group of beta testers. And in hindsight, that, again, it has both its pros and its cons. The great thing about that was that it validated the idea, but it was a bit of a double-edged sword. It had pros and cons because I then felt this incredible pressure to produce and to produce high quality and on deadline, which you can't do all of the above, right? Great things don't come quickly. But when you've announced to the world that you're going to do something, then all of a sudden, every week, you're getting emails from your audience saying, hey, when's your course going to come out? Emails and tweets and Facebook messages from well-meaning audience members saying, when's your course going to come out? Even though what they're trying to communicate is, I believe in you and I'm excited about this course, the way that I received it oftentimes was, oh my goodness, I feel so much pressure. This better be good. You know, it better be done and it better be good. For me, and I think this is a kind of a common human experience, when you feel that degree of pressure, it can result in avoidance, procrastination. You know, like some pressure is good, but too much of it and you crack under it. And that was very much my experience once there was so much enthusiasm around the course. The pressure, it stopped me in my tracks.
Oh, no, I can definitely understand that. After that experience, would you do things differently? Would you go more private with the development of the course before making it public? Or you like the way it still turned out, despite the pressures that it added by making it public, that you were working on this?
Yeah, I mean, I still think that validating a course is a very good idea because if I had spent 3 years and tens of thousands of dollars developing something, it probably cost me about $30,000 in development. And so if I had spent 3 years plus $30,000 plus all of the opportunity cost of that time, if I had invested all of that into an unvalidated idea, I mean, that's just unwise, you know?
Yeah.
And so really, I would have developed a stronger suit of armor around the pressures. I think part of the reason the pressure affected me so much may have just been that I was wholly unprepared for it. I had learned about the notion of validating an idea, but I hadn't really considered what the effect of announcing this to my audience would be and what the effect of getting messages every week saying, hey, I'm so excited about your course. Like I hadn't really anticipated what the emotional effect of that would be. I think I still would have validated the idea. I probably also just would have gone to therapy, quite honestly, or worked with a coach or something. You know, I would have done more to inoculate myself against the pressures that formed around it.
Yeah, that is a great point. I'm really happy that you brought that up because so often maybe we don't give enough respect or consideration to the emotional side of working on different projects, whatever it may be, and the stress and anxiety that can come with that. And not giving ourselves the opportunity, like you said, to work with someone or talk with someone or give ourselves that release of pressure to continue working on something, like you said, that took you, multiple years, and to have to hold on to that for so long, that can be very difficult on yourself to push through the project, even though you're feeling all of these things throughout that whole process.
Yeah. And my, whenever I would try to talk to a mastermind group or anything like that, I found that everybody who I was talking to, their responses were either tactical or strategic. So they would say things like, they would make tactical suggestions about how I could output lessons more quickly. Or they would make strategic suggestions about launch strategy or about longitudinal surveys that I could do about student success, right? Their comments would always be about essentially the operations of the business. And I think, to be perfectly frank, I think that particularly within the FinCon community, sometimes there's some groupthink that happens in which we all, because the people who are drawn to writing about personal finance and entrepreneurship tend to be very entrepreneurially minded. We tend to be business strategists. We can sometimes, particularly among our peers, get so caught up in a bit of a strategy echo chamber that we forget about outside considerations and ideas. And so the thing that really helped me through the development of the course and really through the last couple of years of growing the Afford Anything brand is looking to outside verticals like people who are influencers in the yoga space or in the food or the fitness space, right? I look to those outside verticals and it strikes me that there are some very, very successful people in those spaces who, of course, they're also great entrepreneurs, but they don't seem to be so caught up in formulas and strategy and tactics. So much of what I learn from them is to connect with the psychological and emotional and relational aspects of what we do. And when I saw that helped me a lot. Like when I launched my course, I didn't really everybody kept asking me, like, what's your launch strategy? And I was like, I'm going to start accepting payment and I will let people know about it. That's my launch strategy. Because you don't need a strategy about everything. And if you're in a group environment in which everybody's saying, what's your strategy? What's your strategy? Have you read Jeff Walker's launch? Do you have a 27-point game plan? Have you mapped out your calendar? Like, it's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of stress. And when you, through watching other influencers particularly in other verticals, when you see how they operate their businesses successfully and you give yourself permission to be like, you know what? My launch strategy is I'm going to open the cart and I'll tell people that I've done it. When you give yourself permission to let that be your launch strategy, it relaxes you. And then you can just chill out and be yourself. And as it turns out, that's what your audience really wants anyway. Your audience just wants you to chill out and be yourself. So counterintuitively, it works better.
I really love that point because I think sometimes you're right. We can end up in this echo chamber of we're all in a very similar space. And so we all are hearing the same advice. But not only does that kind of, I think, limit sometimes your thought process, but also it can, I think, limit your creativity because there's so many people who are in this media space itself or this education space, but they're all attacking it from different directions. Everyone's coming at it from a different way. And I think it's so great to see the way that other people work and how do they handle this? Like you said, these different industries that you've worked with, and you can kind of pull from theirs and see, you can take pieces from different areas, different spaces, different entrepreneurs, and kind of merge that into something that works for you and can maybe potentially limit stress or just allow you to be more free and creative in your process. So that was a really great point. I didn't even expect to hear something like that. So that was great.
Oh, thank you.
So, Paula, now that you've had this time with your course, you've launched it, you've gone through the trials and the hard work that goes into building something like this. Is there any advice you have for people who are considering building a course of their own, as far as maybe something that you would recommend they take a look at, or something that you implemented that ended up really working well for you to kind of help them get started and move towards something like this of their own?
In spite of all of the pressures I've just described, I would absolutely recommend validating the idea by pre-selling it to your audience, because if they don't want it and if they're not going to buy it, then why would you dump all of that time and money into creating something that nobody wants, right? This is a huge, never take building a course lightly, because fundamentally what you're doing is you are writing essentially something that's going to be the length of between 1 to 2 books. And then you're going to create video around all of it. And then you're going to manage all of the community the forums, the community interaction, the live office hours or webinars, all of those elements to it as well. And then you're going to have to manage all of the administration around it, plus the marketing, plus the this, plus the that. It is a massive, daunting undertaking. So imagine somebody said to you, hey, why don't you write 2 books and make essentially a short film and then do a bunch of, when I talk about administration, I mean, the thing that people don't think about when you're dealing with a course is every question ranging from, hey, I used the wrong credit card when I purchased it. Is it okay if I switch my payment method? Little questions like that. Imagine 20 of those coming in every single day. 20 questions like that. The administration portion of it is a job. The writing portion is a job. The video production portion is a job. Actively being there for your students, being there to answer their questions, the community management element, that is a job. And you're doing all of this all at the same time. Plus, you're still running your normal daily, your normal blog, your normal podcast, like whatever it is that you also do to keep your brand going. You're doing that as well, right? So that time has to come from somewhere. That time and that energy and that output, it has to come from somewhere. And what that means is that there are going to be other elements of your life or other elements of your business or both that you end up neglecting while you build this course. So you have to decide what you're going to cut. And that cut has genuine sacrifice associated with it.
Yeah, so I can see why it is definitely important to make sure this is something that people would even want, because that's a huge commitment that you're putting into this project. One final question that popped into my mind as you were talking about that is, what's the best way, or I guess like a good way we can say, of doing like a validation test with your audience? Is that putting out a survey to say, hey, what topics would you like to hear about? Or if I were to do a course, what would you like to see? Like what would be a good way to get some honest and real feedback on if people would really be interested in this?
Well, because you yourself are going to be completely immersed in this topic for so long, you only create a course about something that you want to write about, talk about, answer questions about, create videos about, and think about every single day for the next many, many, many years, right? So don't build a course just because a vocal minority of your audience says, I want you to talk about Airbnb or whatever. Like if that's not something that you want to think about, write about, and answer questions about and speak about every single day, well, guess what? That's what you're going to be doing if you build a course about it. So only build a course about a topic that you're passionate about teaching. It's up to you to decide what that topic is. And then once you decide what that topic is, then pre-sell it to your audience to see if they'll buy it. Because if they don't take out their credit cards and make a purchase, or their debit cards and make a purchase, then you don't know if they're going to buy it or not. So you can pre-sell it to them for a major discount. You can pre-sell it to them for $100 or $200. That's fine. But make sure that people are willing to pay to be a beta tester for that, because that's the only way that you can justify, you're going to have to, if let's say that you are currently working a day job and you're also running a brand, you might have to quit your day job so that you can build this, so you're going to need, if not the income coming in from the course, at least the validation to know that this thing has legs and that this thing is worth, if you think about it, kind of quote unquote going back to school for, right?
Yeah.
Like the years in which you're developing this course, those are your grad school years. Those are the years in which you're working really hard, but you're not making any money yet. So make sure that there's some teeth to that. The other thing that I want to say, because I know there are going to be some people who are listening to this who are thinking, well, yeah, but can't you just build a minimum viable product? I am actually a huge opponent of that idea, because your reputation is built on your quality. And if people purchase something, if the people who love you and trust you the most, your fans, they're the ones who are going to be buying this course or enrolling in this course, right? And if the people who love you and trust you the most enroll in something that's minimum viable, your reputation's just going to take a big hit. So what do you stand for? Do you stand for quality? If so, then don't release something unless it's good. Right? That's why we went through 2 rounds of beta testers, and we spent 3 years keeping this course in beta at great personal cost and sacrifice to myself and to the whole team, really. It's because we're known for being good, and we can't ever let that slide. So rather than everybody else, like the crowd says, create the minimum viable product and then put all of your muscle and your energy into marketing. All that does is it lets more people know that your product is mediocre. So I say do the opposite. Create a fantastic product. And then for your first launch, just do a minimum viable launch. I mean, you heard me say, like, my launch quote unquote strategy was I let people know that it's open for enrollment for a week. That's it. That's all I did for the first launch. And it'll improve after that. But I did minimum viable marketing and put everything into building the course, because ultimately, that's where my value system is. And that's what I want to be known for.
I love that because you're right. For one, you don't want to let down your audience who have certain expectations of you. And by putting your efforts into that and knowing this is going to be a sacrifice, but you're trying to make the best product possible, I think will be worth it in the long run, even though, like you said, it's definitely some upfront sacrifice that's going to go into this. So I thank you for giving us all this feedback. And you really made me think about a course in a much different way than I was kind of approaching it in my mind before. I think people are going to really have a lot to think about after listening to this episode and really make some real considerations in their mind as they approach the product. And I think that will only help overall with the quality of the products that'll be out there and be available. And so, Paula, before we go, where can people go to connect with you? Maybe they have a question about the process. Maybe they want to ask something that we didn't get a chance to address here, or if they want to just see an example of what it is that you're putting together. Where's the best place to reach out to you?
Sure. You can find me at affordanything.com. If you are interested in learning more about the course, if you go to affordanything.com/VIP list, that's where you get all of the information about the course. So affordanything.com/VIP list. You can also, I host a podcast called Afford Anything, and you can listen to it on any podcast player. So just search for Afford Anything wherever you like to listen to podcasts.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Paula. I really appreciate your time and you just sharing your experience with everyone listening.
Oh, thank you.
I appreciate you all joining us here for another episode, and it was so great getting the chance to speak with Paula Pant. I don't know if you can hear my voice, but I am still recovering from FinCon and the Plutus Awards this year. It was a great conference, so great meeting so many people and catching up with people I've met before. Jordan Cox and Sandy Smith did an amazing job this year at the Plutus Awards. It was a great way to celebrate 10 years. And congratulations to all the Plutus Awards winners this year. It was great getting a chance to meet each of you and chat a little bit after you won your award. I hope all of you enjoyed the ceremony as much as I did. And what I think you all will really enjoy is next week's episode. Harlan and Miranda will be back to give us a little more info on the Plutus Voices events that are going on around the country. So you're going to want to make sure that you're subscribed. That way you catch that episode and more here on the Plutus Awards podcast. You can learn more about our guests and the Plutus Awards podcast at plutusawards.com/podcast and on Instagram at Plutus Awards. Again, thanks so much for joining us here on the Plutus Awards podcast. And remember to keep creating.